One thing that I've come to realize in a lot of my healing and a lot of my meditation and a lot of my introspection is a lot of our resistance to that trauma and resistance to that vulnerability comes from our ego's perceptions. In our ego's perceptions, one of the most important elements is our perception of time. And a lot of times, whenever we start experiencing pain, or we start feeling emotions, we start feeling some sort of discomfort, our perception of time dictates how much we suffer. Where if I told you, okay, you're experiencing and feeling this, but in about 7.5 minutes, it's going to go away and you're not going to experience it again, you'd be like, oh, this is fine. I can just relax into this. But the ego has this idea of whatever I'm experiencing, this is it, right? Past, present, future, this is my experience. So we create this idea of permanence, and we create this idea that whatever we're experiencing, that's what we're going to be experiencing from now on. So our perception of time dictates how much we suffer in that experience, which is why one of the Buddha's main teachings is the teachings of impermanence.
In today's busy world, how can we find the inspiration, knowledge, and energy to live a healthy and empowered life? If we balance and harmonize our mind, exercise our body, live according to the laws of nature, and connect to spirit, can we find a way to heal, become our authentic self, and live our purpose with love? I am your hostess, Amy Fournier, and welcome back to Awakening Aphrodite. Welcome back to Awakening Aphrodite with Amy Fournier. In this episode, I had the pleasure of speaking with holistic health practitioner and coach, shamanic energy healer, and massage therapist, as well as the founder of Healing 4D, Greg Schmaus. Greg's professional journey began with his own healing, which led him to the Czech Institute and studying holistic health and corrective exercise. And it also inspired him to earn credentials as a licensed clinical massage therapist. And he's also a body worker. He completed the Four Winds Light Body School program studying shamanic healing and energy medicine. But honestly, you guys, his real superpower stems from his personal journey. Wow, it's really quite fascinating. He healed himself of OCD and various physical and mental health challenges, and this helped him form the foundation of one of his special teaching programs, which he offers to people. As with everything in life, the most powerful and effective healers are often those who share from a place of authentic, embodied experience. And honestly, Greg Schmaus certainly fits that bill. It's that common expression of the wounded healer, and truly that's what he is. In this episode, get ready to dive into your mental fitness. One of my favorite topics, I must say. We talk about, well, honestly, he is the ultimate example of the hero's journey. And we get into OCD, something that's unfortunately quite common these days. And Greg shares with us the trauma that he experienced and how it led him actually to his career path, as well as personal fulfillment and growth. How encouraging. And we talk about some of the dynamics of trauma and how to process it so you can survive it and ultimately heal. We talk about addictions, anxiety, how to deal with them, and the dangers of when we trade freedom for safety. Oh no. Something that a lot of us do, I think, we numb out the pain, don't we? All those various vices we have, like over shopping and social media, overeating, over exercising, all these over things. Too much numbing. But Greg talks to us about how to deal with these uncomfortable feelings so we don't have to numb out. And he gives us really great coping skills. And we also talk about how to use your mind in a way that actually serves you rather than enslaves you. Right on. I was all ears with that one. And you know what, you guys? I'm going to tell you, I surprised myself because I actually ended up sharing some really deep personal stuff in this episode. I wasn't planning on it, but I don't know what happens. I put on these magic headphones and I don't know, all my boundaries, I guess, go right out the window. And I'm just so in the moment and so appreciative of my guests and really trying to connect with you that I just really drop into my heart and just want to be honest and vulnerable and open and authentic with the hopes that maybe it can really help you do the same. So in this episode, I get really personal and I talk a little bit about my own personal story with trauma. One that I'm actually not totally out of the woods yet, but I'm getting there. And finally, we talk about why you can't solve trauma in the mind, because it's a somatic experience. Hello, it's in your body. Your body keeps the score, like that famous book says. And we talk about developing self-comparison and vulnerability, feeling safe, and the keys to healing suffering, getting out of the way. And lastly, Greg shares a really great philosophy on how he balances his masculine and feminine essence. And he talks about he does that by tapping into and honoring his nervous system, which, I'd never heard that perspective before, and it is brilliant. It is seriously gold. He drops so much great, inspiring stuff. So if you're looking to learn about compulsive behaviors, addictions, anxieties, getting control of your mind, and how to use your mind to be your servant, not your master, take a listen, pull up a chair, have a cup of tea, and let's talk to Greg Schmaus. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here and connect with you.
Tell us, Greg, your story. It is just truly the hero's journey, my friend.
Yeah. So, my work as a holistic health coach was really, just like it is for many, born out of their own healing journey, which for me started about 10 years ago, where I experienced some trauma. And after the trauma, I started having a lot of physical and mental health challenges. And after many years of struggle, that really brought me to one of my mentors, which is a mutual mentor of ours, Paul Chek, and he really took me on that hero's journey.
Tell us about the trauma.
So what I experienced was actually what's called a testicular torsion, where, to be open and vulnerable, I almost, lost one of my male members.
Wow.
And that led to a immediate surgery. And coming out of the surgery, I started struggling with, a lot of insomnia, a lot of obsessive compulsive type thought patterns and behaviors. And, that's something I struggled with for many years. And the OCD was something that really lasted for many years after that trauma. And that's really what brought me onto that journey of holistic healing, was understanding how my body, my thoughts, my emotions, everything was really so integrated. And Paul was the mentor that really showed me how that all worked and how I can begin, working with the thoughts and the emotions in my physical body and my diet and everything, and how I can really support myself in my own healing.
Okay, so let me get this right. When you had the surgery, that's what all of a sudden kicked in the OCD. You didn't have any.
It was coming out of anesthesia, where one of the nights that I was recovering, I actually started having some hallucinations and started, seeing things. And what I now realize is I actually have some abilities, but back then I thought it was more of a pathology. And what I actually saw, was a woman in the hotel room, which was by the door of the hotel room that I was recovering in. And so what happened was I woke up and I saw this image. And when you're coming out of a deep sleep and you see something, you don't really know what's real, what's not, what was the dream, what's reality. And I was kind of in that vulnerable state. And coming out of a surgery, I also wasn't able to walk. I was in a wheelchair. So I was kind of in bed and felt really, really vulnerable. And when you experience a level of that vulnerability, it creates, a traumatic response in the nervous system. And so what happened after that was I started creating a lot of these obsessive compulsive thought and behavior patterns as a way of avoiding that vulnerability. So whenever I was in buildings, I'd check doors to make sure no one was there. And I'd have a hard time sitting in classrooms for more than 20 minutes. I'd have to go outside. And my mind would kind of, loop and repeat a lot of things to kind of keep me on my toes and keep that kind of hypervigilance to make sure that we don't re-experience that vulnerability that I experienced after coming out of anesthesia.
You know, this is just perfect timing, Greg. I know you and I have been trying to get you on my show for a while now for you to share all your expertise and your journey. Um, but I think it's amazing, the divine timing, because I right now am deep, deep up to my neck in studying about trauma and PTSD, recovering from trauma. I actually just got certified in a new method of dealing, somatic therapy, which is called the nonlinear movement method, with Michaela Boehm, and very intensive training. Unfortunately, I have experience with trauma as well. And this is just amazing because I've always struggled with that mind-body thing and always really had a reverence for the power of our minds. But I grew up with severe phobias in my childhood, and no one could figure out why. And everyone was like, well, just don't think about it. And, think about, butterflies and fairies and all. But my mind, like, logically, I understood. I know this is crazy, but I can't help it. I can't help. My body is reacting this way, in this phobic way, to these certain situations as I was growing up. Went to lots of therapists, all that, did the talk therapy. Again, trauma is a somatic experience. Your cells, your body remembers the experience, which is why intellectually and cognitively, mentally, we can't solve it in just the mind. It's a body experience. So I am just so grateful that you are on the show right now, because I literally am really finally digging deep into my own trauma and my own healing, and hopefully going to help others as well. So where would you begin to tell us about how you learned how to resolve this trauma that was in your body?
So, well, a couple things actually also in response to what you were sharing is, people telling you just think about butterflies and rainbows. Well, there's an old saying, what you resist persists. So, whenever there's a thought pattern or an emotion or an experience rising up in you, anytime you create a resistance to it, you're still entangled in it, right? So, anything you try and push pushes back. So, that's really where that advice doesn't really serve us very well. And a lot of times that actually, makes matters worse, because you're feeding energy and power into something that you're trying to avoid. And also, our thoughts and our mind, our nervous system, our cells don't know the difference between the thought of an experience and an actual experience. On a physiological and on a deeper cellular level, the experience is the same, right? So anytime we're having thoughts about something, it's really the cells of our body re-experiencing whatever that trauma is. And a lot of times what happens is we start developing a lot of these negative thoughts, looping thoughts, intrusive thoughts. And there's a reason for that. Is our number one priority is survival. And in order for us to survive, we have to be aware of the negative things, not the positive things. It's the negative things that are a threat to our sense of safety, security, and survival. So when we experience trauma, what happens is our psyche almost becomes like a watchdog. And that watchdog is looking out for any experience, anything that resembles that traumatic experience. And anytime it sees anything that might be anything similar to it, it kind of goes on attack. And in reality, the negative thoughts that we have is just that watchdog barking, and it's actually just trying to look out for us, right? So a lot of times what happens is we try and tell the watchdog to shut up, like, enough with your thinking. But in reality, it's just looking out for a sense of safety, security, and survival. So that's where a lot of the mindfulness comes into play, is just the awareness that the thoughts that you're having are really your psyche trying to protect you. So instead of trying to get rid of it, first of all, give thanks to it. Know that it's actually an ally, not an enemy. But in reality, that watchdog is looking at the present through the lens of the past, which is really where we have to create a shift, is the awareness that that aspect of our psyche actually broke off and stayed in that experience. So it's looking at now through the lens of then. So that's where the trauma, what happens is we start re-experiencing, or we have trouble moving past something because really the window that we're viewing life from is still a little bit distorted.
Yes, and that's what I've learned in my research, that what happens is the body is frozen in time with that situation, and no more memory or no, and that's actually why a lot of us don't even remember actual traumatic events sometimes, because it's like walled off in your psyche. But I love that you said that, rather than berating ourselves, which I've done my whole life, because again, intellectually, I'm like, this is so stupid. It's so embarrassing. It's illogical. It doesn't make sense. I hate this. I was always fighting myself, and, a divided house can't stand, but I could never understand why this would happen. But then all of a sudden I had compassion for the little Amy in me, that this was the only way she knew how to deal with the situation she didn't have the tools to deal with. So, like you said, in order to survive, this is the plan she had. So maybe I should thank her, because I'm still alive. A lot of people that experience really deep trauma, they check out in one way or another, right? Drug overdose, or, getting themselves in an accident or whatever it may be. So people who have learn to live with trauma and somehow survive trauma are really resilient. They have usually a lot of life force, or the mission to be here for a reason, that they are not checking out. They've just walled off this part of them so they can continue until, hopefully now, hiring someone like you or meeting a really skilled therapist, they can learn the tools to now go back to learn how to cope with something at that time was unmanageable to them. Did I get that right?
Absolutely. And, a lot of this for me comes back to our relationship with vulnerability. And the
Yes.
trauma is really an experience we have, which is a vulnerability that runs so deep that what happens is our psyche says, okay, we can never re-experience a vulnerability like that because it wasn't safe. Right. So what happens is we start creating, especially with, any sort of obsessive compulsive pattern, is we start creating, whether it's routines or rituals or thought patterns or behaviors, as a way of avoiding ever re-experiencing that vulnerability. So for me, a lot of the work is the willingness to step into that vulnerability and really allow ourselves to feel, and feel whatever emotions want to rise up in us. And a lot of times when we're struggling with anxiety, for me, anxiety is not a feeling. Anxiety is the avoidance of feeling. And when we have a lot of these negative thoughts or anxiety or whatever it is, a lot of times that's the avoidance of the feeling. And remember, feeling is a somatic experience, right? Emotions are energy in motion, and that energy is in the body. So a lot of times what happens is we try and divorce ourselves from our body. We try and live from the neck up in our minds. And a lot of times we use the thinking to avoid the feeling. We use the mind to avoid the body. And that's where we start creating a lot of those stress patterns.
Right. So basically, OCD is like an attempt to have sovereignty, have control over your situation. It's a coping mechanism, but it's trying to create certainty in a situation where you don't feel certain. But I guess to some extent, Greg, it must be successful, right? When people that have these, let's just take the washing hand thing. That's very common. I have to wash my hands 7 times exactly, or for a whole 1 minute or whatever. How does that give someone a sense of control? I mean, it doesn't really work, right? Because it's a disorder. They feel compelled to do it, but then they go on and function. So how does it eventually not serve the person where they're like, I need to get help because this is not okay anymore?
Well, we exchange freedom for safety, right? So a lot of the patterns that we create are kind of like a prison cell that we create for us to live in, where a part of us actually feels safe in there, but another part of us says, yes, you're safe, but you're not free. Right? So we probably reach a point where the safety becomes like the coffin of our comfort zone, where you're safe, you're comfortable, but you're not living. So the ego part of the psyche says, I'm safe here, but the soul says, yes, but you're not free. So that's where there becomes an inner conflict. And that inner conflict is really the time of awakening, where it's like, okay, it's time for me to figure out how to create more freedom for myself. And sometimes freedom comes at the expense of safety, because freedom involves actually stepping into your vulnerability, because living means living in the unknown. A lot of times the, obsessive compulsive patterns, the avoidance of trauma, the control mechanisms are, I feel safe in the known, I feel vulnerable in the unknown, so let me stay in the prison of the known because it's safe here. No one can get me, there's no threats, but I know I'm not living. So that's where we just, we're the prisoner, but we also hold the key. And to me, the key is mindfulness. And mindfulness involves, number one, a non-judgmental awareness. And that's where, for me, the practice of meditation is so important, because the meditation allows you to seek a higher vantage point where all these patterns that are going on, you can be the witness, you can be the observer. Whatever chaos is experiencing within you, you can sit in the eye of the storm where it's perfectly still, no matter what's going on around you. So to me, that in combination with the willingness to feel your feelings and feel your emotions is absolutely essential. So there's so many ways in which we do our best to avoid that experience. And that's where a lot of addictions are created as well. A lot of addictions are the seeking of safety and the avoidance of the vulnerability. Whenever we have an addiction, there's a part of us that feels vulnerable, does not feel safe to experience. So we use the addiction as a way of connecting to something else, as a way of disconnecting from a part of ourself that doesn't feel safe to experience. And that shows up with so many people these days, especially with our modern culture and, with all the technology and devices and everything. There's so many ways that you can numb yourself out and divorce yourself from yourself. There's so many ways that you can connect to something else and disconnect from yourself, whether it's, Instagram or any sort of social media, Netflix, food, alcohol, whatever it is. We have so much more availability to those things. So it's a lot easier to go through life trying to avoid the healing process, because there's so many extra ways that we can really, try and kind of weave and work around those parts of ourselves.
Well, I think that's really interesting that you mentioned about addictions and disconnecting, because so much of addictions is definitely that numbing out, but again, I go back to the fact that it's the person's coping mechanism because they have no other option. So if you're saying the remedy is to go ahead and feel, that's a scary place for a lot of us. We feel like we don't have the resources to feel because we might never recover, or we might just totally lose control and have a meltdown. And who's going to then take care of us? Who's then going to, do my job, take care of the kids? Like, they don't have the resources to feel. They don't have the luxury to feel. It's not only is it not safe, but they just wouldn't even be able to function. So what would you say to someone like that? Like, I don't want to feel. I'm going to die, or I won't be able to function if I feel.
Right. So, a lot of that is rooted obviously in fear. And, one of my favorite teachers is Osho. And Osho, I read one of his books called Fear, and he says there's only 3 fears that we actually have: the fear of death, the fear of being alone, and the fear of going crazy. And every fear that we have boils down to one of those 3. So one thing I actually did when I read that book is, okay, let me devote time to each one of those 3 each day. Let me spend time alone with myself so I know there's no part of me that I'm trying to avoid. Let me allow myself to go crazy through breath work, ecstatic dance, whatever it is that allows you to take those control mechanisms and really let them go in a controlled setting, right? We don't want to do anything that's harmful or dangerous, but really allowing yourself, whatever practice it might be. There's so many spiritual practices that involve the ecstatic expression, the unimpeded expression of your body or your breath or whatever it is. So allowing yourself that control time to just go crazy. And the third is the fear of death. So for me, exploring what death means to me, exploring the part of me that is not bound by life or death, and exploring what part of me actually dies, which is really, Ram Dass says the only thing that can die in is an illusion. That truth can never die. So the truth of you, which is really just pure awareness, pure consciousness, is not bound by the bookcase of life and death, the bookend of life and death. And when you can really find that place of stillness, and really, that's why a lot of the spiritual teachings say to die before you die, is really when you allow yourself to go through the death process and things like, meditation, or even something more extreme like plant medicine. Once you go through that death process, you realize that you start connecting to the part of you that is really just eternal awareness. And when you can connect to that, then it makes it a lot easier to let go, and to begin to let go and realize that the parts of you that you've been holding on to are really the illusory parts of you that are not really based in reality. They're a construct that we've created, right? That's the personality, or the persona that we've weared for so long. A lot of the meditation and the plant medicine and all those ceremonies is really learning how to let go of that mask and let go of that persona. And when you allow yourself to feel, you realize that no matter what, the truest essence of my being can never be bound by life and death. So devoting time to those three, and even the study of those three, is so important. Like for me, I love studying, near death experiences, and I love studying what's behind the veil. And for me, actually moving into that fear is absolutely essential, because, a lot of the challenges we encounter are the avoidance of those things. So if you actually do the opposite and step into it, what you realize is what you're stepping into, it was actually the avoidance of it that was creating a lot of the stress. It wasn't actually the thing itself, right? So that's where stepping into those three and devoting time to those three each day is so important. And then also, one thing that I've come to realize in a lot of my healing and a lot of my meditation and a lot of my introspection is a lot of our resistance to that trauma and resistance to that vulnerability comes from our ego's perceptions. In our ego's perceptions, one of the most important elements is our perception of time. And a lot of times, whenever we start experiencing pain, or we start feeling emotions, we start feeling some sort of discomfort, our perception of time dictates how much we suffer. Where if I told you, okay, you're experiencing and feeling this, but in about 7.5 minutes, it's going to go away and you're not going to experience it again, you'd be like, oh, this is fine. I can just relax into this. But the ego has this idea of whatever I'm experiencing, this is it, right? Past, present, future, this is my experience. So we create this idea of permanence, and we create this idea that whatever we're experiencing, that's what we're going to be experiencing from now on. So our perception of time dictates how much we suffer in that experience, which is why one of the Buddha's main teachings is the teachings of impermanence. That whatever you're experiencing, this too shall pass. And that whatever you're experiencing, it's not bound by this linear, past, present, future. I experienced this in the past, I'm experiencing it now in the present, therefore I'm going to be experiencing it in the future. So this illusion of linear time based on the ego's perception of experience really creates a lot of suffering. So, that's why a lot of the shamans say, in order to heal suffering, step outside of time. And, one of my favorite teachers, Matt Kahn, said that's one of the greatest anti-aging tips: step outside of time. Because your cells perceive time based on this linear perception. So when you can learn to step outside of that through meditation and breath work and anything that brings you to that place of stillness, then you realize that this present moment is the only moment you're ever going to experience. And in the surrender to that, there's not suffering. There might be pain and discomfort, but there's not suffering.
Well, I think it's interesting because a lot of our anxiety problems and things like OCD or whatever, is when we become aware of the hyper focus that we have, and that would be the misuse of the mind, right? And to your point, to have, well, I would imagine, and I definitely want to ask you, literally how you recovered, but I would imagine the idea is to have a plan B, because what will happen is when I get triggered in this situation and my body brain says, oh, we've been here before, this is how we're going to handle it. As soon as something triggers me, I would go down that same path, and my brain is focusing on that, as opposed to now I have a new plan. I have plan B that I'm going to focus on, redirect my attention, my mind, using my mind, taking sovereignty back of my own mind, basically, and redirecting it towards a new action plan or way of dealing with it. Is that something that has worked for you, or no?
I had a process. And to me, the process was more, to me, the process feels more real than a plan. To me, a plan is like, okay, when something happens, this is your plan to get out of it.
Yeah.
But to me, a process is, this is the process you go through to go through it, not around it or away from it.
I love it. That's great.
Right? So to me, the process was, first of all, awareness, noticing what's happening inside of me, noticing the thoughts that are rising up in me. Okay, let's bring awareness to these thoughts. What is the intention behind? Well, these thoughts are trying to look out for me, right? These negative thoughts and these intrusive thoughts and these looping thoughts, they're really looking out for my sense of safety. So first thing I would do is like, oh, thank you. I would work with my minds like it was a little scared puppy. The little scared puppy that's looking out the window of my psyche, barking at the property, looking at any joggers passing by that might be a threat, any other dogs that starts barking. And what you realize is a lot of times when the dog starts barking and you look out the window, there's nothing there. Why? Because our psyche is looking at the present through the lens of the past. So I would actually work with my mind like it was that scared puppy. I'm like, oh, thanks, bud. Thanks for looking out for me. I want you to know that we're safe and we're whole at this time. But I really appreciate you looking out for me. And if there's anything that you want me to know, I'm here to listen. And that type of engagement, what happens is the psyche starts to feel like, okay, he heard me. He got the message. I can start quieting down now. So really, the suffering came from me trying to push that part of my psyche away because it felt stressful. But in reality, the only time something becomes intrusive is when you don't want it to enter, right? If you have a house and you live in your home, an intruder is someone that's not wanted. But if you open the door and you're saying, come on in, I want to hear what you have to say, I'll make you some coffee, that's no longer an intruder.
Well, that's like Rumi's The Guest House poem, right? Welcome them all in.
Absolutely. So I allowed that little scared puppy to come in, and I would thank it for trying to look out for me. I would let him know that we're safe. But if there's anything you want me to be aware of at this time, I'm here to listen. So I almost started to become this compassionate awareness of this part of me that is really just trying to protect me. So that was really something that was really important. And then also connecting to that part of us and saying, is there anything we need to feel right now? Because I'm willing to feel that with you at this time. And what you realize is when you start engaging these parts of you in this way, when you actually voluntarily go into these parts of you, what happens is they don't really have as much of a grip on you anymore. They don't have as much of a energy or a power over you because your willingness to engage it actually kind of dissolves its power, dissolves its energy. And it was really the resistance we set up to it that really gave it so much power and so much energy. So it's really just me welcoming those parts in. And, Paul taught me a meditation called the lifeguard tower meditation, where you climb up to the top of the lifeguard tower and you imagine all of this chaos, all of this activity, just like you're sitting up in the lifeguard tower and all the activities, like all the people on the shore and all your thoughts, all your emotions, everything going on is all the activity on the shore, but you're just the one sitting up in the tower watching all of it. So that was really an important practice of being able to rise above all of that activity and being able to witness it. And from that space, from that higher vantage point, another thing that became really paramount to me was something that I started to realize in my spiritual development and some of my coaching and mentoring with him was that, you know, in order for me to access the divine or source within, remember that the divine or source is the source of everything, which includes these thought patterns, which includes these challenging emotions, which includes these traumas, includes these belief systems. So if I truly want to experience my own divinity, which is my wholeness, I can't start divorcing myself from these parts of myself because I'm actually divorcing myself from parts of the divine, right? And so if the divine or source is unconditional, anytime I say I'm willing to experience this but not that, I've set up a condition. Anytime I say this is a good thought, this is a bad thought, I've set up a condition. Or I'm willing to feel this, but I'm not willing to feel that, I've set up division. And anytime you set up conditions and division, you've divorced yourself from the part of you that is divine, that is source. So, in order for me to really find that space of, let's call it unity consciousness, which is oneness consciousness, wholeness, I can't create all of these divisions, these conditions, and these judgments as to which parts of me are good, which parts of me are bad, what I want to experience, what I don't want to experience. And the more I learned how to surrender, and really that's the number one aspect of our healing is surrender. The deeper we're willing to surrender, the more healing takes place. And that really was an important time for me, was when I said, okay, if God exists within everything and everyone, then God also exists inside of this OCD. So if I'm trying to push this away from me, I'm actually trying to push part of God away from me. So in order for me to really self-realize and have the fullest experience of myself as an expression of the divine, I can't divorce myself or reject any part of me, because then I lose my experience of wholeness.
What about the person that does not believe in a higher being? To me, what I'm hearing you say, that trust and vulnerability and surrendering, to me, would require that we believe in something bigger than us. And what about the person that might be an atheist? I mean, how would they cope, right?
So the belief, you don't necessarily have to believe in a higher power or source or the divine. That to me is kind of irrelevant. But what is important is to understand that in a lot of the great spiritual teachings, you know, a lot of what we're talking about is the teaching of truth. And the teaching of truth in the great spiritual teachings all lie in paradox. And that's something that any person, an atheist, whatever, can really embrace, is that the deepest truths, the deepest laws of our experience lies in paradox. And I'll give you a few examples, because this really taught me how to work with my mind and really taught me how the mind works. So I would read a lot of, you know, Zen Buddhism and a lot of Hindu, a lot of Taoist teachings. And what I would come across are these proverbs that were really these just great big paradox. Like one of them would be, if you want to shrink something, let it expand. If you want to get rid of something, let it flourish. And to the rational mind, to the ego mind, you're like, that doesn't make any sense. But then I was like, okay, let me take that and let me apply it to my OCD, to my, you know, looping thoughts, to my anxiety. And it was like, okay, if I want to get rid of you, let me let you flourish. So I would tell these parts of myself, go play, go run around. It's almost like a puppy in the park. I'm going to sit on the bench and watch. You just go do whatever you want to do. And all of a sudden the mind goes silent. Right. And then I would be like, okay, if I want to shrink these thoughts or shrink these emotions, what if I let them expand? So I would tell these thoughts and emotions, go expand, go flourish, go do whatever you want. I'm just going to sit here and just ride the wave. And all of a sudden the mind goes still. So I was like, wow, that's so interesting. the more space you give it, the less space it takes. The more you try and control it, the more it controls you. So I started to realize that a lot of these spiritual teachings, whether you believe in God or not, it doesn't really matter. There's still truth in here, that it all resided within one big paradox. And that really taught me how the mind works. And in reality, the mind is just the flow of energy and information. And what happens is with trauma is we try and categorize, this is good energy and information, this is bad energy and information. And all of a sudden, the flow of energy information is like the flow of the waves or the tide in the ocean. And someone trying to avoid trauma or having anxiety or OCD, they're trying to swim against the tide all the time. But these truths, these paradox, and this surrender, and this climbing up to the lifeguard tower and witnessing and observing and stepping into your vulnerability is learning how to ride the wave. And a lot of the fear of the ego is, where is that tide going to take me? What if it takes me somewhere I don't want to go? But in reality, it's taking you back home.
That's fantastic. Well, what's coming up for me is the law of impermanence, right? Is that for us to recall, as you mentioned earlier, that, you know, all this too shall pass, right? That famous saying, this too shall pass, that everything comes and goes. And even if it's a good thing, it's not going to last forever, but that's okay, because when the time that it's a bad thing, you're going to want it to go away. But perhaps we can keep that in mind as well as we just kind of ride that wave of the impermanence of all of it. I think I'm just going to ask you again, though, what comes down for a lot of people with a deep trauma is that they intellectualize everything that we're saying. But if they say, okay, Greg, I'm going to go right into it, I'm just going to let myself feel all these feelings and freak out and lose control, that still is super scary for them. And so what would you say to your clients that still resist really doing that? Like, how would you talk them through or encourage them to, it's safe. It's safe to go ahead and feel and emote.
So, you know, a lot of our resistance to feeling is the stories we've attached to the feeling. And I'll give you a simple example, and this is an example I use with a lot of my clients, is you're getting ready to go on your first date with someone you just met and you're really excited. So you're about to get in your car and meet them or pick them up or whatever, and you're feeling a lot of excitement and anticipation and you can't wait till you really see them. And all of a sudden what you notice is, I got some butterflies in my stomach and I got, you know, my heart's beating a little faster. Even my palms are a little sweaty, but I'm so excited and this feels amazing, right? And then all of a sudden you have another experience where you're experiencing anxiety about something. And all of a sudden you get these butterflies in your stomach and your heart starts beating faster, your palms start sweaty, but you associate that with anxiety. So you're like, oh, I don't want to feel this, right? This is uncomfortable. In reality, on a physiological and energetic level, the two experiences are exactly the same. But the story you attached to one was excitement and anticipation of my first date. And the story you attached to the other was anxiety about something. So you allowed yourself to experience one because of the storyline, and you didn't allow yourself to experience the other, and you started resisting it because of that storyline. But in reality, the two experiences are identical. So if you drop the story and just drop into the physiological experience and actually start approaching it with curiosity, it's like, oh, what does that feel like? Oh, my palms are sweating. That's interesting. Oh, my heart's beating a little faster. That's interesting. Oh, I feel my stomach turning a little bit. That's interesting. Let me feel that for a moment. And you approach it with mindfulness. And remember, mindfulness is a non-judgmental awareness. The storyline is the judgment, which dictates good or bad, right or wrong. But in reality, the two experiences, when you drop the story and drop the judgment, is exactly the same. So that to me is a big thing, is okay, drop the story and drop into the body. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, this isn't so bad. My heart beats faster after a heavy set of squats. My palms sweat when I'm about to get in the sauna. I get butterflies in my stomach when my spouse is coming home and I haven't seen them all day, right? So in reality, when you drop into the actual experience, you realize that it was the storyline that was creating all of the stress. It wasn't the actual physical experience. You know, something that I heard once that was really powerful is feeling your feelings never caused anyone pain. The avoidance of feeling your feelings is what causes most people's pain.
Mm.
And a lot of that is based on the storylines that we've attached to each one of those experiences.
Well, I think this is amazing because the meaning that we give things is a left brain activity. You know, the feeling side is the right brain activity. So once again, it's the dominance of that left brain and resisting going into the right brain, the feeling body. And it comes right back, I think, fear of dying ultimately. That, you know, what's that saying? The most powerful person is one that's not afraid to die, right? Because it's all on the table. They got nothing to lose. So that ultimately the fear of death is probably underlying a lot of it. And which is interesting because this morning, just in my Tai Chi outside, I was kind of contemplating how ironic it is if the soul can't die, then why is it that ultimately so much of our suffering is fearing dying, right? You're like, I'm going to die. I'm losing control. It's like the biggest irony, I think, of life when you think about it, that wait a minute, the soul carnates, comes here knowing that, you know, it's coming here to accomplish something. It's got something to learn or something to give or whatever. And it knows it's temporary. It knows it's impermanent, you know, and it knows it's going back to source, which is eternal. But at the same time, we agree to take on the mindset while we're here that we're going to be afraid of dying every moment, you know, like it's the ultimate irony, don't you think?
Well, that's where, you know, that's why we drink from the river of forgetfulness.
There you go. I thought you were going to say that's why we drink. Okay.
Well, that's why we drink certain things.
There you go.
But we, you know, I think we drink from that river of forgetfulness. So then the remembrance is really, you know, where we awaken.
We come home.
And, you know, I think we're born in that state of oneness and, you know, connection. And then we go through this period of, but we're not aware of it, right? We're in a state of oneness and connection, but we're not aware of that oneness and connection. And then we forget about it. We create more division. We live in this world of polarity. And then our spiritual practice is really allowing us to return back to that original state. But the return home after that level of forgetfulness is really where we return back to that oneness and connection, but with the awareness. You know, that's why, you know, I think it was Paul Chek who said, love is consciousness becoming aware of itself. Right? Which I thought was so beautiful. And it's just the awareness that we are aware. And, you know, that to me is, you know, one of the most important elements in our spiritual development is really that process of, you know, connection, but not aware of the connection, polarity and duality and disconnection, and then the return to connection, but with that newfound awareness. And then, you know, I love Ram Dass's teachings about this idea of becoming nobody, and how a lot of our life is really this building up of this idea of somebody. And the spiritual practice is the willingness to let go of that somebody and return to nobody. And paradoxically, that experience of nobody is the connection to everyone and everything. So it's really, you know, the ego that feels bound by life or death. And the ego is what we take on in this lifetime. So it's really the healing of the ego's perceptions. And, you know, that's the only part of us that really dies is, you know, the physical matter and the ego, the personality or the persona, which is the masks that we wear. So a lot of the fear of death is the fear of taking the mask off.
Brilliant. Talk to us more, Greg, about how you balance the duality in you know, particularly, you know, kind of like that masculine and feminine element in us.
So a couple of ways is, you know, first and foremost is honoring the nervous system. I think that's one of the most important ways that we can honor the masculine and the feminine, the yin and the yang, is, the feminine is that parasympathetic, rest and digest aspect of our nervous system. We can call the masculine that fight or flight response. And for me, one of the first steps to balancing the masculine and the feminine is learning how to honor the nervous system, learning know learning and knowing when it's time to rest and not do that next task or do that next set or do that next whatever, and then knowing when it's time to, go and get the job done, right? So learning how to balance and honor the nervous system and letting that guide me rather than my own ideas guiding me of what I should or shouldn't be doing is one way in which I really learned how to honor the masculine and the feminine. In terms of honoring the feminine, one thing that's really important for me is learning to feel and learning how to step into that vulnerability. And, a lot of men have a hard time doing that. And until we can really honor the feminine inside of us, I don't think we're really a man. And I think a lot of the challenges we see with men these days is born out of the avoidance of the feminine parts of themselves.
How so? How would, because I'm not a man, like how would a man avoid, other than, not wanting to feel his feelings, but how do men do that, Greg?
Well, one thing that I noticed, and I did this for very long, is the addiction to our physical body, addiction to exercise, addiction to building muscle mass. The more strength and size we create exteriorly, I don't know if that's a word, but externally, the more we can divorce ourselves from what's happening internally. It's a form of armoring that we wear that we can carry as a way of avoiding our vulnerability. And it's a layer of separation that we can create from the outer world so we don't actually let people in, right? Another way in which I've also, experienced the avoidance of that feeling, avoidance of that feminine, is my addiction to information consumption. My addiction to information consumption, there's this information armoring. And it's like, okay, if I armor myself with all this information and know everything that's going on and know everything about everything, then I don't actually have to rely on the expression of my own heart because I always have information that I can use to express myself with, but really armor myself with. So
Wow.
It's one of the many ways in which I avoid my vulnerability, avoid my inner feminine, is the armoring of the physical body and the, let's call it the intellectual body as well.
Well, I think you got my number on that one, Greg. That one just like doink right off my head. Addiction to information. I never heard anyone explain it that way. So I want to make sure I got this right. What you're saying is that that's a way to avoid us going into our own heart to express our heart's truth rather than regurgitating some other fact or something that we came across, or?
Yeah. So, if I have all this information that I can use as a vehicle to express myself, I don't actually have to share anything about me.
Right.
I don't actually have to share how I'm feeling.
True.
Right.
Wow. It's a good deflection.
Yeah, absolutely. And I still probably do it to this day. Absolutely.
Greg, I got to hand it to you. I never had anyone explain it quite like that. I think that's brilliant. Fantastic. I love it. That's so helpful. We're just taking a moment to interrupt our amazing show today because you know what? I wanted to thank you. I want to thank you personally for leaving me a review on iTunes. If you haven't left a review yet, please consider to do so. Just quickly go on iTunes, scroll down my main page. Underneath the review that you're looking at, you will see a little link that says write a review. Just hit that link, type in how you feel, whatever comes from your heart, and just put in a made-up name if you want. You can just put in Happy Person 202, whatever you want if you want to be anonymous, and then hit the send button, and you're done. And that's just our way of having a relationship. And once again, thank you so very much. Now let's get back to the show. So just to kind of close that loop on the OCD, so what we're hearing you say is you basically healed yourself of your traumatic OCD by your process of being more mindful, being removed as a witness to your experience, allowing yourself to feel it, to go right into it. And I heard you almost speak like you were almost parenting yourself. You said, speaking to it like a scared puppy, or the scared child part of you that is afraid. Is that how you healed from it? And is that what you teach your clients?
Yeah, that's, some of the main aspects of it. There's much more that we can get into, but that's a huge component, is the ability to rise above and
Okay.
witness through
Mm-hmm.
meditation, the willingness to feel your feelings and experience it on a physiological, energetic level, but drop the story that we've attached to it.
Yes. Drop the story.
And learning to engage the scared parts of us like a scared child or a scared puppy and say, okay, I'm going to be the parent to you that you needed during that experience that may not have received.
Mm.
And honestly, for me, that's where I've also healed a lot of my challenges within my family with my parents. Is okay, a lot of people have issues with their mother, challenges with their father. But if we can actually realize that the challenging ways in which they parented us, we actually start parenting ourselves in the same way. And to be able to say, okay, how would I have liked to be parented? Okay, this and that. Okay, let me be this and that to those parts of myself that needed that at that time. And all of a sudden, you start healing where mom and dad still live inside of you. And those are the parts that are the triggers that they trigger within us. And all of a sudden, your relationship with your mom and your dad is so much better, right? Because you've healed
That's
the triggers
fantastic.
inside of you that are mom, that are dad, because, you know, the reason they can push your buttons is because they're the ones that installed them.
Right. And it comes back to what you were saying about awareness is the first thing, that you becoming aware that you even have them inside you, and you're doing this to yourself. You're repeating that behavior to yourself, the thing that, would drive you crazy about your parents. So I love that, how, again, what you're saying is to remove ourselves and be the witness to being aware that you're even doing it. And then what I always tell people is, you just sometimes have to tell yourself what your inner child wants to hear. What is it that would make you feel better? And sometimes when I don't know what I'm feeling because I get really stuck, I just ask myself, well, what would make you feel better? What can I do to love you and that make you feel safe? And even if it's just asking that question, and don't censor it, just whatever that kid says is the answer, and us learning. I think that's just a huge part of all of our healing, whatever our pain may be, is, just being kind and compassionate to ourselves.
Yeah. And we talked about paradox earlier. And one thing that's a big paradox with trauma and wounds and pain is a lot of times, whatever wound we acquired when we were younger, whether it's, pain of rejection or abandonment or whatever it is, paradoxically, one way in which we try and avoid re-experiencing that wound is by wounding ourselves in the same way. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Let's say one of our wounds was, we felt rejected by, let's say, very simple example. I was a child and I liked this girl on the playground, and I wanted to kiss her, I wanted to hug her, I wanted to ask her on a date, and I went up to her and she rejected me. Right? So there's a wound that I experienced. So what happens after that is, whenever I want to go ask someone out or go up to someone, I say, you know what? No, that's not safe to do. Let's not do that. So what am I doing? I'm rejecting myself before they can. Right? So look how you're actually wounding yourself out of a way of avoiding anyone else wounding you. And that's the ego's form of control. I feel more in control when I'm wounding myself than I do opening myself up to be wounded by another. Right? If we fear abandonment from another person, what do? We stop being ourselves. We start being who we think they want us to be. Right? That's a classic, like, empathic, like, sensitive person who's like, who do you want me to be? I'll be that. Well, what are you doing? You're abandoning yourself and you're being who you think they want you to be out of the fear of them abandoning you, right? So it's like, okay, where am I wounding myself out of the avoidance of someone else wounding me? And when we actually start to look at that and resolve that, then, a lot of those wounds start to heal, because a lot of what we've been carrying is how we're actually relating to ourself in that way.
So brilliant. Greg, how much, I know you're fully trained in the Czech system of holistic health, and you've had experience as a shamanic healer and energy medicine and clinical massage. But how much of your work, just listening to you, is really just counseling people?
Most of it.
Yeah,
Um,
I would imagine.
I mean, my work has evolved over the years. As a
Hmm.
Czech practitioner, a lot of it was like physical rehabilitation and nutrition and lifestyle, which I do all of that work. But it's really transitioned to a lot more of like the mental, emotional, and spiritual coaching and counseling. So that's really where I find a lot more sense of purpose. And it's really, like we started out of, born out of my own journey and my own experiences and, my own
Mhm.
healing. So.
Well, you had said our challenges are the curriculum that we're engaging in so we can learn to grow into more wholeness every day. And I'm assuming that's what you mean by that. Did you want to expand on that at all? That thought of, are the challenges are really the school we need to learn?
Well, I'm of the belief that we all come into each lifetime with a curriculum. And that curriculum includes a lot of our challenges and a lot of the lessons and pains and wounds and all of that. And within all that is really our growth potential. A lot of, what we acquire by engaging that curriculum is the wisdom that we could say our soul came here to learn for its, next phase of development. And in relationship to what, you've been doing a lot of work on, which is trauma, is if we look at ourselves as like a puzzle, and whenever we experience a trauma, a piece of the puzzle breaks off from the whole, right? So a lot of our healing journey is really taking those fragmented pieces and putting them back into the puzzle. So now we have this experience of wholeness.
And that's what's also called soul recovery, is it not? Because you lose a piece of your soul when, particularly when you're a victim of trauma or any kind of abuse. It's like you're calling your spirit back. You're calling your soul back. And what more important work is there than that, right? Being whole, complete, fully who you are, and owning your own soul.
That's what, our healing journey is about. So that's why, I speak about it being, that returning back to wholeness. And yeah, in shamanism, that's the soul recovery, soul retrieval. And, I've done a lot of that work, and it's very, very powerful and very inspiring.
And that's why you've said that you're actually grateful for the trauma that you underwent, and you even suffered with OCD because it was your lesson that now you have walked that path, and now you can help others heal as well.
Absolutely. And it's also, it's brought me a sense of purpose in terms of, the work I do with my clients, really how I show up and serve every day. But it's also my feedback mechanism, right? So, as much as I can say I've healed OCD, those patterns will still rise up from time to time.
Oh.
And those patterns will rise up whenever we reach a place of stress or a state of stress or a fight or flight response, or we don't honor the nervous system. And anytime we go into that fight or flight stress response, it will always reactivate our weak spots, right? So the OCD or any of these patterns that rise up, a lot of times it's like a feedback mechanism showing us where we're out of balance and where we might not be managing ourselves very well, whether it's our diet, our sleep, our exercise, our relationships. And a lot of times, whenever we create that fight or flight, that stress response, we create like this inner wind up inside of us. And something like the OCD is like the release valve. So we have to take a look at, okay, where am I creating too much wind up inside of me? Where am I not honoring my nervous system? Where am I overly contracted and mismanaging myself? And these symptoms are showing up as a messenger saying, hey, this is where you need to take a look and make some adjustments because you're really out of balance. And I'm just telling you, I'm giving you feedback as to where you need to bring yourself back into balance.
Brilliant. It's like, shooting ourselves to death, right? And just we're overriding the body's signals. And, that's a big part of the whole purpose of my show, Awakening Aphrodite, is to help people understand that balance between the go and the flow, as Michaela Boehm says, that understanding. And I love how you put it, honoring the nervous system. And that feeling when your body's like, that's it, stop, don't push yourself. It's not honorable to work all the time. You've got to have that balance. And that's been a big part of my journey. And again, what really a big part of this show is helping particularly women, because we tend to get, caught up in that whole mindset of like work and, doing and accomplishing and achieving. And to understand there's a lot more to us than that. And you know what? You're going to end up accomplishing a lot more when you do so with balance and reverence and discretion. And you're going to do so in a way that is much more fun and enjoyable, not only for you, but for everyone else around you. That's for sure. So, Greg, this has just been amazing. I just could talk to you for hours. There's so much more of your wisdom I wish I could tap into. Maybe I need to hire you. Is there any last parting words or things that you want people to know or share with our viewers and our listeners?
Well, the big thing for me is, something we've touched upon is that whatever challenges we're experiencing, whatever pain we're experiencing, whether it's a health crisis, relationship challenges, they're really here to give us the opportunity to grow and really give us the opportunity to expand our spiritual growth and our awareness and learning how to take responsibility for what we're creating in our lives. And a lot of times we can, fall into a lot of those, survival archetypes, and we can, play the victim or get caught in a lot of self-sabotage, or, play the child archetype where we're looking for others to take care of us or whatever it is. And a lot of times, if we just understand that whatever we're experiencing is an opportunity for us to learn and grow, then it's really a source of empowerment. And a lot of those archetypes I was just talking about is where we disempower ourselves. And I know in my coaching, a lot of the roadblocks that we hit in terms of people's healing is when we fall into those survival archetypes. So that's something that's so important, is just the awareness of whatever we're experiencing, whatever we're going through, whatever challenges we're having with our health. It's really an opportunity and a lesson and, a koan that we're here to learn. It's like a riddle that we're here to understand. And once we understand and get the message, then we don't need that challenge anymore. We're ready to move on to whatever's next. So that's really, to me, what's been very empowering, is knowing that whatever challenge we have, it's really our soul's opportunity to grow itself.
And it is the ultimate paradox, is to be empowered, you have to feel like you're empowered. You know what I mean? Like you have to feel like you are responsible. You do have a choice. It's not something you have to do or you can't control, but you might be recreating, like we mentioned earlier, how your parents treated you. You're the one doing it to yourself now and acknowledging to be empowered that way, to be responsible. I know that happened to me after I closed my club, after the pandemic. And I was busier than ever. I started the podcast and I started all my online classes. And it was like I went from one frying pan to the next one, but I didn't have the excuse of, well, I have to run this club and I have all these members I'm responsible for and employees. Now I was doing it to myself. So it was like, I even talked to Paul about that. I'm like, now I get it. Like I am unconsciously, here you go, the martyr archetype, right? I was unconsciously repeating this behavior and setting up my life and telling myself I didn't have a choice and it wasn't my fault and I was just doing the right thing and all this stuff. But I was doing it to myself. And I'm still unwinding that. I struggle with it every day to this day. Who knows? Maybe by the time somebody's listening to the show, I might be healed of it. I don't know. But it's been truly remarkable, Greg, for me to realize that it's really true. Like we're creating so much of our own suffering. And that's a crazy thought, however, an empowering thought.
Yes. It's challenging to come to that awareness and realization, but it's empowering to know that we can also change that.
There you go.
Right? And we can, take what life is offering to us and realize that it's not happening to us, it's happening for us.
Yeah, I used to hate that saying, but now I get it. Fantastic. Greg, thank you so much. Please tell everyone how they can find you if they want to hire you, what you have to offer, anything new you're working on, your social media, all that stuff.
So they can find me at healing4d.com. And that's where they can reach out to me, connect with me, set up a call with me if they're interested in any of my coaching or program offerings. I have a 10-page free guide called the Mental Health Blueprints, and they can get that by going to healing4d.com/guide, and they can download that. And then I'm in the middle of filming an online course called Healing the Mind, A Journey to Wholeness.
Wow,
and
great.
That will be available within a couple of months. But if they go to healing4d.com/guide and they download the Mental Health Blueprint, which is just a free guide I put together, then they'll be notified when the full course comes out. And then I'll have that Healing the Mind program ready for them as well. And then my Instagram is 4D_healing, and they can connect with me there. I usually post 2 videos a week with some teaching, some free coaching, some online content. And they can connect with me there directly if they want to, get in touch with me for any coaching. But the best place to find me is through my website, healing4d.com.
And go ahead and spell that for us, because I know it has the number 4 in there.
Yep, just healing, HEALING, the number 4, lowercase d.com.
There you go. Fantastic. Greg Schmaus, thank you so much for coming on Awakening Aphrodite.
Thank you. So much fun, and I enjoyed connecting with you.
Me too. Bye, everyone. Would you like to support my mission to help empower people all over the world to be all of who they truly are? If so, please subscribe to the show, leave a review on iTunes, and share it with a friend. And if you're looking to take immediate action to align your energy and optimize your health, visit amyfournier.com. Thanks for listening to Awakening Aphrodite. Let's awaken her together in you. I'm your hostess, Amy Fournier, and I already can't wait to be with you again and for you to hear what I have planned for the next show.
Thanks for listening to Awakening Aphrodite with Amy Fournier. To learn more about Amy, check out her website, amyfournier.com. That's AMYFOURNIER.com. You can also check out Amy's live and on-demand virtual fitness and yoga classes, and sign up for her newsletter to receive a free mini ebook of 3 of her top tips for making holistic health a lifestyle. Again, that's amyfournier.com, and get your ebook sent to your email immediately. Connect with Amy on the daily on Instagram at FitAmyTV, FITAMYTV, and watch many of the podcast episodes and subtopic clips on her YouTube channel, which is also FitAmyTV. Enjoy, and we'll see you next time on Awakening Aphrodite.